Chapter 12. Mrs. Mark held the talent show dishes in the classroom because the auditorium was being used by another group. I know this is going to be enjoyable for us all, she gushed. She wore a bright yellow dress that made her look bigger than the sun. Her hair was piled on her head like a heap of mud. Mrs. Mark was the only one in the room with a smile on her face. My classmates and I all sat stiffly, facing forward. No one talked. No one laughed. I heard a lot of throat clearing and saw a lot of nervous hands tapping on desks. I'm going to call you to come up and perform at random, the monster announced. Remember, this is only an audition. It isn't the real show. But give it your best, people, because I will be moving you up and down on the food chain today. She looked straight at me when she mentioned the food chain, and she licked her lips hungrily with that fat cow tongue. Celeste was called up first. She had a cassette with background music. She sang My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music and did a beautiful job. Mrs. Mark moved her up to second on the food chain. Peter Clark, the boy on the bottom of the chart, did his act next. He made different musical notes by opening his mouth and slapping himself on the head. He played The Star-Spangled Banner on his head. It sounded pretty good. Mrs. Mark moved him up 4 notches. That meant that Molly was at the bottom of the chart. The night before, I'd asked Molly how she got to be so low on the food chain. It was after dinner, and I was practicing making balloon animals as she rehearsed her violin number. Mrs. Mark caught me trying to escape, Molly explained. It was 2 days after school started. I was so frightened. I climbed out a window and tried to run down the hill. Molly sighed. But Mrs. Mark has video cameras all over the place. She caught me before I could get halfway down. She dragged me back. The next day, she moved me down to the bottom. Molly shook her head. She's been on my case ever since, she murmured. That's why I have to play my best at the audition. Otherwise, her voice trailed off. She's on my case too, I said. I held up my balloon animal. Do you like this poodle? Molly stared at it. Poodle? I thought it was a horse. Now I stared across the row at Molly. She was frantically tapping her fingers on the chair arm, waiting nervously for Mrs. Mark to call on her. But the teacher called the red-haired girl instead. She performed a Martin dance. She did okay until she got a cramp on her foot and had to stop. Mrs. Mark shook her head, but didn't move the girl up or down on the chart. The girl stayed in the middle of the food chain and was really happy about it. Mrs. Mark called Molly next. Molly played a short piece by Bach. She appeared nervous at first. In fact, when she started to play, her bow slipped right out of her hand. But when she started, she was wonderful. Her bangs tilted and bobbed as she swayed with the music. When she finished, the whole class applauded. She took a short bow and walked back to her seat. I could see that she was trembling. Sweat rolled down her forehead. Very good, Molly, Mrs. Mark said. We have one more violinist to hear from. Then I'll decide which of you will play at the talent show. But, Molly stammered. Aren't you going to move me up on the food chain? She pointed to her name at the very bottom. No, I don't think so, Mrs. Mark said. But why not? Molly demanded. No reason, the teacher replied, crossing her blubbery arms in front of her yellow dress. But that's not fair, Molly cried, her voice breaking. Of course it isn't fair, Mrs. Mark snapped. I'm a monster, remember? A few kids muttered low protests, but most everyone stared straight ahead in silence. We all knew that Molly had gotten a bad break, but I don't think anyone wanted to risk getting in trouble and taking her place at the bottom. Mrs. Mark called Brad next. Let's see who is the better violin player, she said. She rubbed her doughy hands together. I love a good competition. It really makes work an appetite. She laughed. She was the only one. I shoved my hands into my pockets to keep them from shaking. My mouth suddenly felt as dry as sand. I was really scared now. If Mrs. Mark wasn't going to play fair, I was in major trouble. She hated me. I saw Molly still trembling at her desk. She covered her face with both hands. Brad went to the music room to get his violin. We all waited in silence for him to return. Celeste flashed Molly a thumbs up sign. I guess she was trying to cheer up poor Molly, but Molly had her face covered and didn't see it. Brett returned carrying his violin case and some sheet music. His hand was shaking when he set the music on the music stand. He kept clearing his throat and wiping sweat from his chin. I could see that he was really terrified. He opened the case with a quick snap of his wrist and flipped open the top. He reached for his violin and then stopped. He shrank back. He let out a loud groan. No. Oh no! Brett wailed.